Well, you're Performance Director for Team GBR. That sounds like a heck of a big job. What does it involve?
Well, my key function is to manage the world-class programmes which are funded by lottery and exchequer funding through DCMS and then through UK Sport, which is the UK's elite sport governing body. So really I look after or oversee the Olympic discipline programmes and para-equestrian dressage with an involvement with the non-Olympic disciplines, because obviously they all challenge for medals at the World Equestrian Games.
So that means that you're involved in the organisation, in the funding, in the actual assessment of performance of riders as well? Or
yes, I mean, to an extent. What we do is we have a performance manager in each of the disciplines. So Yogi Breisner is the performance manager for eventing, so obviously this is a key event here at the Mitsubishi Badminton Horse Trials for him. Each performance manager is responsible for what we call the performance pathway, which is the route to medal glory in each of the disciplines. My job is to coordinate primarily those 4 programmes, to coordinate the staff that work between the programmes, and obviously to make sure the figures stack up at the end of the year, and all the logistics for major championships.
And with eventing, certainly, I know that riders are not obliged to compete at badminton as part of their assessment for the Olympics this year. What do they have to do in terms of major events? What flexibility do they have?
Well, I think it's very interesting looking at how different disciplines' selection policies and methods have matured over the years. With eventing, there's a very good dialogue between the riders and the selectors, primarily through the performance manager, Yogi Breisner. And it's about discussing each horse-rider combination. So if a horse has very good form going back a couple of years, then do you need to push it at badminton, or do you just need to prove that that horse has still got the form? That's kind of what they're looking at. I suppose where it gets difficult for a rider is when they're sort of, you know, are they on or are they off? Do they need a good result at badminton, or would they be better doing some advanced and some CIC 3-stars? So that comes down to discussion with Yogi and the selectors. But it's about getting, in the case of the Olympics, the 5 very best horse rider combinations to the finish line. So we don't want to over push an older horse if we don't need to. So it's about getting those 5 best horse rider combinations to the finish line and securing medals.
Given you have such a wealth of knowledge about performance, Will, who's going to win badminton this year?
If I knew so much about performance and which horses were going to perform, I'd probably be a dealer and not a performance director. Well, I think it's very interesting. You know, Yogi and I were chatting last night. We've got every European champion here going back to '99, so we've got some real high-class jockeys. You know, we've got Clayton Fredericks, who won a 4-star last year. So I think, you know, you need to look at Clayton, at Nicholas Touzon, and of course from Britain you've got Mary King, William Fox Pitt, Daisy, Dick. You know, you have some really good rider-horse combinations here, and I think it would be a fascinating competition. And also the weather could play a big part. You know, if it does get wet for Saturday, then the horses at the beginning of the day could find they have a time advantage on the cross country. So no, I'm not going to put my neck on the block, but I think you have got some of the best riders in the world and some of the best horses in the world. So it's going to be a fascinating competition. And I haven't heard anyone call it yet, so I'm not going to start.
Well, the Olympics this year must be a complete logistical nightmare with getting all of those horses and people and stuff out to Hong Kong. How does that work?
It's certainly more difficult than Athens. And of course, the equestrian events are in Hong Kong, which is actually an advantage in a way because it's a huge seaport there. So getting containers in and out is quite easy. But look, we've got 14 horses going to the Olympics, 7 to the Paralympics. I was working out the other day, it's about 4,000 kilos of Mark's Way horse hage. It's about 8,000 kilos of kit travelling with the horses on the aircraft. Then we've got some 80 flights on hold for humans. We've got about 1,400 room nights booked at a hotel. And then you've got to get everyone there with their bags, so total 5 please, on the right day, in a happy mood. It is big, but hey, that's what we're here for. Yeah. Where we benefit is the lottery funding that we get, and that allows us to have what I hope is a pretty professional backup to all the Olympic and Paralympic disciplines. Without that, you know, we'd be relying on volunteers and enthusiastic volunteers, and that's not so easy when you're trying to deal with modern day legislation of shipping kit around the world. So yeah, the lottery funding is vital, so get out there and buy your lottery tickets.
A lot's been talked about the climate difficulties in Hong Kong. I presume that the whole sort of logistics has been thought through. In your view, what are the biggest challenges out there?
Well, it's been massively thought through, and actually I think that whilst it's going to be hot and humid in Hong Kong, what we don't get in Hong Kong is the pollution issues that would seem might exist in Beijing. So from that point of view, we're perhaps better off. Yes, it's going to be hot and humid, and that's one of the challenges, but every Olympic Games brings a challenge with it, that people focus on. We've got to get 14 horses, 14-hour flight to Hong Kong with all their kit, so it's not the only challenge. Now, what's been done over the last 3 years is a lot of what's called virtual test events, which is measuring the heat and the humidity throughout the period that the competitions would run. And we've got a very, very good idea of when the best time to compete is, and that's when the competition programme is going to take place. The cooling facilities that the Hong Kong Jockey Club have built are world-class, fantastic. The horses are going to be in air-conditioned stables. In fact, the stables are probably better than most of these horses are used to at home. They're big, they're rubber-matted, they're air-conditioned. So the facilities for the horses are fantastic. And I think following the test event last year where we took 3 horses, we have a really good idea of what we need to do to produce those horses tip-top form on the day, on the 9th of August when the eventing dressage starts.
And lastly, we're already thinking about the horses that are going to represent Britain in the 2012 Olympics with your London list, Equine Pathway I think it's called. How does that work?
Well, what we did when the additional lottery funding came through on the back of winning the 2012 bid, which was a fantastic day, we took a step back and we said, well, we already have a pathway to identify young riders, so why aren't we trying to identify young horses? Well, in principle, that's great, but of course there are hundreds of people all around the world trying to identify young horses. They're called dealers. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but we have pushed forward. We've done quite a bit of research, and we now have, as you say, what's called the Equine Pathway in dressage, eventing and jumping, and we're working to try and identify horses that have the ability to compete for Great Britain earlier on in their careers, and then working with the riders and owners to help them produce those horses in a way that they can maximise their potential.
And how many on the eventing list at the moment?
I think there's over 100, because we've started off doing it on a statistical basis. So we had some research done when we looked at the history, competition history, of some 60 or 70 horses based in Britain that had reached championship level. That was very interesting. But that's going right down to sort of 6-year-olds. So that doesn't mean to say we're going to have 60 to choose from in London.
No, but I mean, if you only look at the number that have withdrawn from badminton this time and how much has to go right for somebody to have a horse on the day, let alone all of the years of preparation, I can well imagine you have to have a list of over 100 to get your team out of that. Yeah,
well, there's a fairly good statistic in sport generally, that it takes 10 years to reach the top. It takes 10,000 hours of training, and only 10% make it, and that's 10% of identified talent, and that would be no different in our sport.
Will Connell, thank you very much.
My pleasure, thank you.
Thank you.